Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon with Hyde Park United Methodist Church in Tampa, Florida. I'm MHotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement.
And I'm Magrey the Senior Pastor.
So Magrey, this Sunday was Baptism of the Lord Sunday.
Right.
And you preached a sermon all about baptism. So I thought right out the gate, what is one of your most memorable baptism stories as a pastor? Because you probably have done, how many baptisms do you think you've done as a pastor?
Countless. I wouldn't even guess. Probably into the hundreds. Over my 27 years of ministry, a lot.
A lot. Yeah. And so I'm sure some stand out to you. Yeah. What's one that stands out to you?
Well, as I said in the sermon, I don't remember my own baptism because I was barely 8 months old or so. But I certainly remember the baptism of both of my daughters, Grace and Madeline, particularly Grace's baptism. She's my older daughter, because she was baptized in a United Methodist church in Minnesota, in a small town called Malacca, Minnesota, which is where their mother Jessica, basically grew up as a child. Their family went to Malacca United Methodist, and it was the Methodist church where not only Jessica grew up, but also her mother and her grandmother and her great-grandmother.
Wow. Okay.
And so in that moment, we had Grace, who was attending her grandmother's baptism, whose her first name is Pamela, which is Jessica's mother's name. So Grace's grandmother was there, wearing the baptismal gown that was originally worn by her great-great-grandmother. And of course, her mother Jessica was there. And Grace obviously was the one being baptized. So we had in that moment 5 generations of women who were represented in that moment. And so it was a very, very special time to remember just how intergenerational baptism can be.
Yeah. Wow. And when you make those vows to the parents of like, will you raise this child?
Yeah.
Like, it's also almost like a first time for the parent of being on the receiving end of baptism.
True.
Of like, oh wait, the onus is on me.
That's
like
true.
In that distinctly Methodist sense that I think you kind of gets missed in like a baby dedication.
That's right.
But like that onus of like, will you raise this child? You know, and like, do you renounce the spiritual forces of wickedness because you've got to renounce them because you're going to raise this kid.
That's right.
And you better be raising this kid in such a way.
That's right.
Where they're renouncing these things.
It is definitely an imposing sort of thing to think about. But because we only do public baptisms in the United Methodist tradition rather than private baptisms, we're always surrounded by a spiritual community who, as part of our baptism liturgy, promises to support that family and that child throughout their years.
That's right. And in preparation for even this conversation, I was just reading a little bit about like the evolution of the United Methodist liturgy and some ways that churches have started, because the liturgy is a lot to handle sometimes in our fast-paced culture, will like cut it down and you lose some of the congregational responses. And then it all of a sudden does become this thing that doesn't have the voice of the people speaking into it.
And to take it one step further, not only do we lose the fullness of the liturgy when we truncate it, we also tend to forget that in the ancient Christian tradition, the actual baptism was preceded by a season of instruction, or what often is called the catechesis, where a candidate for baptism, even an adult, went through a series of classes in preparation for it. So it wasn't just a one-off sort of event, certainly wasn't just an excuse for a party or an occasion. It was a culmination of a season of instruction. And the closest we come to that in our church is we have a baptism class where we spend an hour with the family to talk to them about what baptism means. But it's a much bigger tradition where a candidate went through a series of classes, often culminating in Easter morning, which is usually in the ancient tradition was the one and only day a person was baptized, was on Easter morning, to literally experience the resurrection of Christ in their lives.
Yeah. So, well, there's one other thing you say at the end of every baptism of a child.
Right.
That is very theologically important to what it means for what's going to happen in that child's life later. So can you deliver that line? I think I've set you up for it. I think
Sure,
you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. What we say is that we celebrate what God is already doing in this child's life, and we look forward to the day when that child will stand on their own 2 feet before God and the congregation to accept for themselves the vows that were moments ago taken on their behalf by their parents and their godparents, and accept for themselves their faith in Jesus Christ at the time of their confirmation, which for us at Hyde Park takes place in 7th grade when the person is roughly 12 or 13 years old. And you're right, that is an important part of the journey, that the student themselves will grow up, and at the time when they can fully understand it themselves, accept for themselves Jesus into their hearts.
Yeah. And they take all those vows again.
Right.
Of renouncing spiritual forces of wickedness and so on and so forth.
That's right.
And there's a catechesis involved with it.
Yes. For us,
they learn a lot of things.
12 or 13 weeks. And so that is definitely a part of the preparation.
Yeah. Because there are things that make us distinctly United Methodist when it comes to baptism.
That's right.
That we'll get to momentarily.
That's right.
First, let's talk about other baptism stories that we've had.
Yeah. So do you have one?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hear your story.
So I was, at some point when I think I was 12, 13, 14, I don't quite remember. My mom has this revelation that she just goes, wait a second. I think I only got you dedicated in an Assemblies of God church. I don't think I got you baptized. And it was just this moment of like, oh, well, I'm like involved in the drama team. I'm on the tech team. I'm like a leader in the youth group. We should probably get this kid baptized. And so it was just one Sunday. I think she also realized at the same time that she had never been baptized.
Okay.
So I think, and she might, I don't know if mom listens to this, Susan, but if you do, set me straight here. But I think we both got baptized on the same Sunday.
Cool.
Yeah. And it was, I don't know, I think I was like 14 or 15.
And this was at Anona.
At Anona, yep, where I grew up.
A church in Pinellas County in Largo. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then I think there's another, well, this kind of goes to it illustrates for me something that you talked about in your sermon, which is that passage from John 10:40,
right,
where Jesus goes back to the Jordan, right? One thing that is really interesting about John, right, is John actually, the Gospel of John starts with John the Baptist.
That's true.
Right? There was one calling out in the wilderness.
That's right.
This is kind of the bookend of the John part in the Gospel of John, where Jesus gets to go back. And then John's own people go, oh, right?
John's gospel gives the fullest description of John's ministry and the fullest sort of unpacking of his message of any of the other gospels. And so you're absolutely right. It should not be a surprise that of all the gospels, it is John who brings Jesus back to the Jordan River to remember not only his baptism, but the entire ministry of John and its meaning in his life.
And the people who were John's followers go, oh, John didn't perform signs, but I see what John was getting at here, right?
Right.
So I have a story of being at the Jordan and then returning to the Jordan. I'm not saying I'm Jesus, but I have like a John 1 moment and then I have a John 10 moment.
Oh, I love it.
In 2008 with Anona, I got to do a pilgrimage to the Holy Land.
Yeah.
And we did the whole pilgrimage thing. And if you've ever done a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, you know that part of that is going to the Jordan River. Right. And there's this, Magrey, you earlier called it like a cattle call. You're just you're moving through the process of going into the river, getting dunked, which is like the one time in United Methodist tradition that we like allow ourselves to be dunked to remember our baptism. We're pretty stingy about the dunking. Anyways, but that, and then, you come back out and you're like, hey, that was awesome. Well, I got to do that on the pilgrimage. And then about a month later, because of the way my trip went, me and my friend Jacqueline found ourselves back at the Jordan River, just by ourselves as tourists almost, at the Jordan River, and I just got to swim in the Jordan River. And like, that's a really different experience.
Yeah.
It's two bookends, but like, I remember both of them. But what stood out to me about swimming in the Jordan was you could take your time. You can enjoy the body of water for what it is.
That's
as someone who grew up in coastal Florida, right? You know about different bodies of water and you appreciate a different body of water in each minute. The rocks that were at the bottom of the Jordan River.
I love that.
If you're on the side where everybody gets baptized, spoiler alert, everybody steals the rocks from the Jordan River. So it's actually really sandy on the baptismal side of the Jordan River. But if you go to the other side of the Jordan, there's all these little pebbles and rocks down at the bottom that you can pick up. And it's just really interesting.
What I love about that is that your second experience in the Jordan River definitely had a deeper sense of play, of recreation, of just being in the moment. It wasn't this sort of staid, formalized, sort of liturgical thing, which is important. But you really got to play in the waters of baptism, which theologically is a richer idea when it comes to remembering our baptism, that it's not just that moment that is formalized and liturgized, as important as that is. That's why we practice it. But the idea of remembering your baptism should invite creativity, imagination, play, renewal, all of those things that you got to experience when you remembered yours.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you.
I love
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Well, and then in your sermon, you kind of take us to this interesting paradox within baptism, right? Of dying and being raised in Christ.
Right.
Which I didn't realize you actually say in the baptism liturgy. I think I had to look that up again when you were saying it in the remembrance of the baptism. It's like, that is part of that prayer that you give over the water.
Death. Yes, absolutely. Because the whole idea of Jesus being immersed is that he prefigures or anticipates his death by going deep into the water, literally being buried in the water, and then being raised up out of that water is a prefigure or an anticipation of his being raised to new life. And so that's why baptism took on such a significance in the early church, that when we are baptized, we are buried with Christ, raised to new life. And so immersion, full immersion, or dunking, as you called it, is certainly rarer in the United Methodist tradition, but it's not out of the foul lines. We certainly do immersion and full dunking because it is the most vivid way to remind us that in baptism, we are buried with Christ and then raised to new life in Christ.
Yeah, so speaking about the United Methodist tradition, as we get ready to wrap the podcast, let's just give people a quick primer on what baptism is distinctly in the United Methodist tradition and how it connects maybe with grace.
Absolutely. Grace is directly intertwined with both sacraments, baptism and communion. But with baptism in particular, the reason we baptize babies is we believe that God's grace is at work in our lives from the moment we're born, even before we recognize it, even before we're able to affirm it for ourselves. It's a lifelong journey. And so one of the things I talk to parents about when I do the baptism class is to say that when your child is baptized, the child is not the primary actor. The parents are not the primary actor. Even the clergy is not the primary actor. God is the primary actor. God is the one who is saying, "You are my child." God is the one whose grace is already active in that person's life. Without God's grace, there is no baptism. And so that's why these two things are so directly related.
Yeah. So then if God's the primary actor in baptism, draw the thread for me then as to why for United Methodists, it's not that you're a bad person if you get rebaptized. It's just that United Methodists will not rebaptize somebody.
That's right. And it's all linked to this whole idea that it's not our works that save us, that the only reason we're able to say yes to Jesus is because of God's grace that empowers and enables us to do this work. And that enabling, that empowering by God begins at the moment of our birth, from the moment our life begins. That's what enables us to say yes to Jesus to begin with. Otherwise, saying yes to Jesus becomes a work that we do that makes our salvation possible. And that's not true.
Yeah. So let me wrap this up in a practical way for anybody who's listening. There's two categories of people I'm picturing right now in my mind. One, you have been baptized and maybe someone kind of turned you onto our stuff and you're like, I don't know, man, I'm not really feeling this God thing anymore. I need something to feel this more deeply. Communion is always an option. We do it the first Sunday of every month, which is a sacrament. It's a means of grace, a way to feel closer to God. And in the same time, remembering your baptism is something that, yes, we do it on this Sunday in particular, but it's also an invitation that can be done. It's a liturgy. It's a thing we can do in the church. So if that's something that would be meaningful for you in reconnecting with your faith, reach out to us. You can reach out to me or reach out to us via our Next Steps page. And then I think there's another person who might be listening to us. And that's somebody who hasn't been baptized yet. Oh man, we would love to meet you. I think our community is life-giving. It is liberating. And if you're somebody who needs to experience that in your life and has never experienced that before, come talk to us. We'd love to be part of that journey with you.
I couldn't say it any better.
Well, thanks, Magrey. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Sermon. We'll be back next week with more content. Till then, I'm MHotho.
And I'm Magrey de Vega.
We'll see you later.